Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me. Uh, I am the executive director, as Dan says, of the Washington County Historical Society. We opened our new Heritage Center that he was talking about back in October of 2021. It's on Greeley Street near Highway 36. Great place. It's open 10 until 4, Tuesdays through Saturdays. Come on in. I think we have somebody else coming in, so that's why I'm stalling a little bit. The throngs are coming now. Just like a typical baseball game, right? So I'm going to talk to you tonight about Bud Fowler and the 1884 Stillwater Baseball Club. I never realized that Stillwater had a professional baseball team, and that this team actually had something to do with White Bear Lake. So it's kind of nice that I'm coming here today to talk to you about this team, this player in White Bear. Now, how did I learn about this team? How did I get involved in baseball? Well, I played baseball when I was a kid, but I really got into the history of baseball when I went to college. My first college class was the history of sports with John DeMiglio back in the fall semester of 1982. John DeMiglio, I thought this was going to be a walk in the park, easy A. I got a C in that class, and I was happy. He was a stickler for all sorts of sports. But we started talking about black Negroes in baseball. And I thought I knew everything. Jackie Robinson. I even knew some of the earlier ones like Moses Fleetwood Walker and his brother Welladay. But I never heard about Bud Fowler before. And I was up in the row. It was a big room, and there's about 150 students, and we're all taking notes. We have this textbook, and he's talking about some of the first blacks ever to play the game of baseball professionally, getting paid to play baseball. And he talked about this guy named John W. Fowler. And I was taking notes, but it was kind of dozing off. And he said that John Fowler really got his national notoriety when he played for the Stillwater, Minnesota team. I said, what? I've generations in Stillwater, I've never heard about this team. So I needed to know more about this team. But to know more about this team, I needed to know more about the history of baseball in Stillwater. So how did Stillwater become a baseball town? Well, one of the first articles about baseball being played in Minnesota was actually down in Nininger, which is down by Hastings. But the first time Stillwater was mentioned was in 1859. It said that St. Paul was traveling to Stillwater to play a game. We didn't know where they played, we didn't know who was on the Stillwater team, and we don't know the outcome. But it was just a short little blip in the St. Paul newspaper. And then in 1860, another match in Stillwater from St. Paul. Again, that's all we had is that little note in the newspaper saying that the St. Paul team was traveling to Stillwater to play baseball. Well, baseball kind of took a hiatus because what happened in 1861? The Civil War. So all the young men ended up fighting battles in the Civil War from Minnesota. But the Civil War actually spread the baseball because the Union prisoners in the Confederate camps would play baseball. The Confederates would get interested in baseball, and all of a sudden, baseball became kind of one of those things that everybody could relate to. So after the Civil War, a team was formed in Stillwater, and they were pretty good. A lot of Civil War veterans came and started this team. In 1867, the team got a name. It was called the St. Croix Baseball Club. Pretty nice name, huh? And then in 1868, the St. Croix Baseball Club became state champs when they defeated the Northfield team 2-1 in the playoff. Well, so baseball started really going out all over Minnesota. And there was a new professional league in 1876. It was called the National League. I don't know if you have, those Milwaukee people, the Milwaukee Brewers. I know we don't pay attention to them. They're in the National League. That league was formed in 1876. The Chicago White Stockings was the first league champions. And after the season in 1876, they barnstormed all across the country, mainly up to the upper Midwest. And yes, they barnstormed into Minnesota, where they played in St. Paul, they played in Minneapolis, and they played the St. Croix Baseball Club on October 19th, 1876. You know, the Chicago Club, you probably heard of some of these, Spalding, Cap Anson, Andreas, and there was also this outstanding shortstop that played for the Chicago White Stockings named Johnny Peters. You might want to remember that name. The St. Croix had their club with W.E. Easton, Fred Pennington, Thomas Burmington, H.J. McCusick, and Charles P. Gregory. You know, they were a good club. They were playing against the best team in the nation. And what do you think that score was? The White Stockings defeated the St. Croix 18-3. But that wasn't bad. They scored some runs. And the game is still not going on. But that flamed the fuel, not only in Stillwater, but throughout the state, for baseball. Baseball was it. That was the game. So after 1876, the other teams started popping up, and they were being sponsored by big corporations. And the Minnesota Chiefs Baseball Club of Stillwater from 1880 to 1883, they were sponsored by the Seymour Sabin Company, and later they were the Northwest Thresher Company. And one of their biggest threshers was known as the Minnesota Chief. So as the sponsor, the baseball club took that name. So in 1883, hey, Thomas Burmington is still there. Andrew Brown, Thomas Griffin, Gordon Whitley, I think it's Burton S. Carr, Fred Javine, James Messenger, Thomas McCarthy, and Daniel McCarthy. All of these players were playing. This team was now a semi-professional league because some of the players were actually paid. On this team, B.S. Carr, Fred Javine, and Gordon Whitley all went on to play in the major leagues. So by 1883, the owners, the sponsors of this club saw such great response. The crowds were coming in hand over fist. They were making money. They thought, there is money in baseball. So let's go from semi-professional and try to get into a professional league. Well, how are they going to do that? Because Stillwater, which was very big, wasn't that big. Stillwater was approximately, if you included the population with South Stillwater, which is now Bayport, and also Oak Park, the population was just over 15,000. Logging and lumbering was the main industry in Stillwater, and they had another institution on North Main Street called the Minnesota State Prison. In 1884, there was a couple of disastrous fires in the old state prison in January, and caused the convicts to be moved for a while, including the famous or infamous younger brothers, Cole, Jim, and Bob, who were in a gang early on with another set of brothers, Frank and Jesse James. The James boys escaped, but the younger brothers served time in prison. So Stillwater was a big town. A lot of lumber, a lot of money coming through there. But they needed a good population to have a lot of people attend these games. So what they did is they decided, a group of investors came together, and they needed to raise $10,000, which was a lot of money back then, to get into the league, into any league. They were trying to find maybe the Upper Mississippi League or the Lower this league or the Midwest League or whatever they could find. But they got into what was called the Northwestern League. Now, the Northwestern League also was experiencing expansion. And they went from 6 teams in 1883, and they went up to 12 teams in 1884. So here are the Articles of Incorporation of the Stillwater Baseball Club Association. And Stillwater was mentioned in this national sport magazine called The Sporting Life. And it said that Stillwater was a plucky little town for raising money to get this team into the league. And so Stillwater pressed and pressed and pressed, and they got into the league. They were one of the 6 expansion teams, which included Minneapolis and St. Paul. If you want to see what the Northwestern League looked like, this is what it was. You can see Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and 3 from Minnesota. 5-state league, 12 teams, fantastic. But Stillwater was kind of behind the 8 ball. Stillwater's behind the 8 ball because they got into the league last. And so what did they need to do? They needed to find players. I mean, all these leagues were expanding, all these teams wanted players, they needed to find some good players. So the Stillwater Baseball Association directors, included Charles P. Gregory, who happened to be a player when they played against the White Stockings back in 1876. There was William Conrad, Frank Joy, Dudley Hershey, Seward P. Richardson. You can see pictures of Conrad and Gregory up here. They were businessmen, and they were going to make a lot of money on this. But the businessman, Charles Gregory, was the one who was tasked with finding players. And they went all over the place, from Rhode Island to Chicago. They found one player from Minnesota that they signed. But when he was in Chicago, Charles Gregory was approached with the name of a great second baseman and pitcher. His name was John W. Fowler. And Gregory was quite excited about this because Fowler was just a great player. The problem was he was black. 12 teams in the league. Say there's about 15, 20 players on each team. So you've got about 200 players in that league. John Fowler, or Bud, was the only black man in that league. Now, there was some problems. Not all the board of directors thought it was a good idea. You can see that George S. Brown up there says resigned. Well, they had quite the argument at one of their directors' meetings. And this fact was published in the Stillwater Messenger back in March of 1884. And here's what it said about Fowler. It says, Mr. Fowler's recommendations are the best. And though there was at first considerable objections of prominent members of the club, all objection has disappeared, now meaning Gregory's gone, and he will be respected in proportion to his skill as a player. Now, that's pretty forward thinking for 1884. But now you would need a field manager. You have the baseball directors, but you needed a field manager to make sure that everything ran smoothly. Just like we have managers today in the baseball teams, we had managers back then. And the Stillwater had 4 managers over the course of the season. The first manager was Joel May. He left right away. Then there was Joseph Miller, Fred Gunkel, and Johnny Peters. We don't have a photo of Fred Gunkel, who is obviously the best of them all at 7-7. But if you're from White Bear Lake, you might know Joe Miller. Now, Joe Miller is advertised as an old-time baseball guy who was living in White Bear Lake. He played 2 years in the National Association with Washington, Keokuk, and Chicago. So Joseph Miller was living just down the street from here. So he got in there, and some of the others, like Fred Gunkel, which we don't have a photo of, But he played one game for Cleveland in 1879, and he was an umpire in the Northwestern League before he became the manager of the Stillwater Club. And Johnny Peters, the guy at the very end, Johnny Peters, remember that name? I said Johnny Peters was the great shortstop of the Chicago White Stockings when they came to play in Minnesota in 1876. Johnny Peters played 11 years in the major leagues with the Chicago White Stockings. He also played for Providence, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh. And if you read some articles about the early baseball committee at the Baseball Hall of Fame, his name is mentioned often about being inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. He was that good, and he played and managed for Stillwater. But getting back to Joseph Miller was from White Bear Lake. He lived here at that time. And Joe Miller, he owned his own business at that time. Here's a nice sketch that I got of his business. It's called a sample room. Do you know what a sample room is? A sample room is a saloon. It's a bar. And his sample room included pool and other things. This was a sketch, and the White Bear Lake Area Historical Society sent that to me. It's great. Joseph Miller had this sample room for a while. He ended up passing away in the early 1890s at age 41, and he's buried down in Cincinnati. But now we talked about Fowler, how he got into baseball, how he got into the Stillwater team, but here's the original club members, and you can see Frank Jones, John Noonan from Rhode Island. Oh, here's Gibbs from Des Moines, Iowa, Harry Yarnell from Philadelphia. I got a couple from Chicago, one from South Boston, Elgin, Illinois, and the only one from Minnesota was Joseph Visner. Joseph Visner's pictured there and in uniform, but later when he was playing in the major leagues, Joe Visner is also one of the very first people to play in the major leagues with indigenous background. So let's talk about some of the things that we found here. The Stillwater Daily Sun noted the salaries for these guys. Might be interested in how much they made. It seems the average was low for the league. It runs a little over $1,000 per man. It was also noted that John J. Horan received a salary of $1,200 with a $200 bonus. So the Stillwater Gazette, when talking about these players, it's noted that it's either play or take a walk. The only members of the club that would, the starting members of the club would change often. The only players that stayed through the entire Stillwater season were Fowler, Visner, and Pickett. But what about Fowler? What makes this Fowler guy so good? Here's John W. Fowler. Fowler was born in 1858 in Fort Plain, New York. By the time he was 2 years old, his father, by the way, he was born John W. Jackson. His father was John W. Jackson Sr. Fort Plain, New York is in the middle of the state. 2 years later, by 1860, his father, who was a barber, took his family and moved to a town in New York you might know. You ever heard of Cooperstown? So John W. Fowler grew up in Cooperstown, New York. In 1878, he became the first black professional baseball player in history when he played for a Massachusetts team and got paid to play. He pitched, and he did very well. He played 3 or 4 games, some of them with the Lynn, Massachusetts team, and then he moved on from there. From 1878 until about 1883, he bounced around from wherever he could play. Whatever white team would take him, he would play for them. He also learned the skill of barbering from his father. So if he wasn't playing baseball, he has set up his own shingle, and he had his own barber shop, or he moved into another as a partner with another barber. But in Stillwater, when he arrived in March of 1884, he lived at this boarding house called To Live and Let Live. Kind of appropriate, I think. Live and Let Live was owned by William Humphreys, an African American, and then Humphreys got Fowler into the barber shop of Sam Hadley, who was a well-known black barber in Stillwater. You can see he came early enough to get into the Stillwater City Directory. It says John W. Fowler, barber and baseball player, boards at Live and Let Live. Now, one thing I didn't tell you about is about how his nickname became Bud. According to things that I've read, it was Fowler that would go around and say, "Hey, Bud, how you doing? Hey, Bud." He'd call everybody Bud, so everybody else would start calling him Bud until the nickname stuck. So Bud Fowler is that's how he got his nickname. So the Northwestern League season for 1884 was 110 games, 55 at home, 55 away. But there were league standards that Stillwater had to live up to. And one of the big standards was the stadium or the field in which they had to play had to be an enclosed stadium all the way around. Stillwater didn't have that. So they were working hard on getting that field fixed. So the Stillwater Club played its first 27 games on the road. So that's about half of their away games came right in the beginning. In 1884, the national game, the rules of baseball, and here's some interesting facts of the 1884 baseball. Pitcher's point was not 60 feet 6 inches like it is today. There was no mound you stood on. It was 50 feet away from the batter. You know, you have 3 strikes and you're out, but you get 4 balls and you walk. Well, back at that time, 3 strikes, you're out, you had 7 balls, and then you would walk. There were some preseason games that were organized. Stillwater played their first exhibition game against St. Paul in St. Paul on April 26th. The Stillwater Club won 12-6. Fowler was playing left field. He went 2 for 5 and scoring 2 runs. Stillwater played 2 more exhibitions on the way to their first league games in Peoria against Rock Island. Losing the first game 15-9, Fowler having 1 hit and 1 run scored, the following match had Stillwater winning 14-4. With Fowler having 3 hits, 2 more runs scored. The Rock Island Argus, their newspaper, noted, "The Stillwater Baseball Club, Negro and all, departed for Peoria on the Rock Island Peoria Road, where they were cross bats with the Peoria Reds." Well, the season is starting. Just like the Twins, the Twin season starts in what, 3 days? Well, the streak. This is great. We got to talk about a streak for the Stillwater team and Bud Fowler. But it's not the streak you kind of want. Because they started their season in Peoria. They played their first league match against Peoria, and Stillwater lost 15-0. In that game, Stillwater had 17 errors, and the pitcher was a guy named Harry Yarnell. Now, see the baseball, the zings by. You can see these big gloves that the players play with today. They catch these balls, but in 1884, there were no gloves. It was all barehanded. So, if you see 17 errors, just imagine you trying to grab a hot grounder at shortstop. You can understand why there are so many errors. So they lost their first game. But Fowler didn't play. The second game, Stillwater lost again, 12-8. Fowler played center field and catcher, and he went 2 for 5 with a run scored, including hitting a triple. The Peoria transcript said, Fowler, a gentleman of color who did good work, is one of the best players of the club. And Stillwater lost the third and final game in Peoria, 1-0. The lone run scoring on a drop fly ball. And Fowler in that game hit into a triple play. Well, Stillwater moved on to Quincy, Illinois. Oh, this is going to be great. Well, they lost 3 more. The last game by a score of 16-0. In that match, the battery was for Stillwater, M.J. Bradley with pitching and Fowler catching. Fowler was also spiked in the foot. The next set of games was in Milwaukee, and again, losing all 3 of them. Fowler was right back in the lineup, but the St. Paul Daily Globe noted, Fowler, the colored second baseman of the Stillwaters, was an object of great interest. And his fine feeling and swift running elicited many favorable comments. He injured his finger badly in a plucky attempt to stop a grounder from Griffin's bat in the 9th inning. But he will be able to play on Monday. The second game, Bradley pitched again and lost 14-4. Bradley was released after the game. The last game with Milwaukee, Stillwater lost 15-7. Oh my! Now how many is that? I think that's 9 in a row. Now they're going to Bay City, Michigan. Oh, this is going to be a lot better. Which their hopes of winning that first game in Bay City were dashed when they lost 21-9. Stillwater committing another 16 errors. The second game saw Fowler pitching for the first time. The Stillwater Gazette noted Fowler, the colored general player of the Stillwater club, kept the boys guessing up until the 6th inning while pitching in Bay City. The Bay City club won 4-0, and Stillwater lost the final game 12-1. Well, that's fitting because that was their 12th loss in a row. Oh, well, now they're thinking better. They're positive. They're going to Saginaw, Michigan. You hear that song? Anyway. Well, Stillwater made a comeback in the first game, but it fell short. They lost 6-5. The next game, they lost 9-6, and the final match of the series, Stillwater again lost 8-2. The streak is now up to 15 in a row. Will they ever win a game? Now the club has to go to Fort Wayne, Indiana. The first match was just like the previous 15, losing 12-6. The Fort Wayne Gazette noted that the Stillwaters work together harmoniously. Play ball to win, and why they stand at the bottom of the league race is one of the mysteries of ball playing. A number of their defeats have been by the closest scores and more attributed to bad luck than bad playing. 16 in a row. Fowler played in 13 of the 16 losses. 51 at-bats, 5 runs, and 10 hits, batted 196. And that was the best of the team. So, now they move on to the second game at Fort Wayne, and ta-da! Fowler is pitching. Finally, the Stillwater gets a win at Fort Wayne. Fowler pitched. The Fort Wayne Daily Journal noted Fowler, the colored player, being in the box. His delivery is speedy, and the fact that Fort Wayne only got 7 hits off him shows it was effective. Fowler would also receive, for getting that first win, a new suit of clothes and a $10 bill. Fowler pitched the next game, and they won again, 8-5. Now we got another streak, winning 2 in a row. Now the boys are going to Terre Haute, Indiana. Oh, Terre Haute. We love Terre Haute, don't we? For 3 more games. Fowler pitched again. 3rd straight game, and again, he won the game, 11-8. The next game, Fowler played second base, going 2 for 5 with a double, and Stillwater winning again, 11-3. And the 4th game, Fowler pitching again for the last game, the 4th game in his last 5, and winning again 5-4. So they now have a 5-game winning streak. Fowler pitched 4 of those 5 games. The Terre Haute boys, the Stillwater, what does it say? The Stillwater Daily Sun noted, Stillwater won games Thursday and Friday from Terre Haute. If the Stillwaters could only stay and play at Terre Haute for a month, how happy we might be. For the 5-game winning streak, Fowler had 20 at-bats, 5 runs, 8 hits, a .400 batting average. And now, with all of that, Fowler started getting noticed. You can see this advertisement in the Grand Rapids Eagle. See Fowler, the great colored pitcher. What else did they have to say? In the Stillwater Daily Sun, it was Fowler was our colored bonanza. And the Quincy Whig saying the playing of Fowler, the colored pitchers of the Stillwater, was one of the features of yesterday's game. After capturing 2 long flies in left field, he was placed in the box at the commencement of the 7th and did some excellent pitching. His base throwing was also quick and accurate. He is one of the most handy men on the visiting 9. The Muskegon Daily Chronicle noted Fowler is a phenomenal pitcher. He is a good one. The St. Paul Daily Globe noted Fowler, however, played right away from everybody else in both teams, making a total of 6 bases and 5 chances offered, and running the bases like greased lightning. He plays ball as though really in love with the game, and although ebony-hued, is a prize of no small value. But did you notice something? As the newspaper notes kept on coming about Fowler, they stopped saying, well, except for the Daily Sun or the ebony-hued thing, they no longer call him the colored player. They just call him the player. All of a sudden, the color part, the black part, just kind of washes away, and now, as they predicted early in the season, he was being judged for his skills on the field, not by the color of his skin. Well, Stillwater finally gets at home. Finally coming to that new ballpark. It's kind of like maybe Target Field, right? Maybe not. However, they did. Stillwater is home. They played Minneapolis. Season tickets for the games were $10 for the season, or 25 cents per game. After the long road trip, Stillwater's record was 6-21, but they were not in last place. Think about that. The home game against, what was it, Minneapolis? The game was documented in the Stillwater Gazette, inning by inning. Fowler again was pitching, but fell short at the home opener, losing 3-2. The Gazette said there was a little too much funny work by Fowler, which, if dispensed with, would prove a benefit to the club and give better satisfaction to the audience. The Stillwater club lost the next day to Minneapolis 8-7, but the final match of the home opening series had a Fowler pitching, and he beat Minneapolis 10-6. Stillwater played their next 3 games against St. Paul, losing 2 but winning the final match also 10-6. Stillwater had been infusing their lineup with new players because as the season was going on, they weren't making money, obviously being on the road for 27 games. So some of the players were being let go, and they were getting new players. Otto Schomburg, Patrick Dealey from the Milwaukee Reserves, John Quinn from Canada, and Brown Connors, and there were others that would come onto the team. The Stillwater club would win a few and lose a few more at home. On June 26th, Stillwater beat St. Paul 11-7. Fowler had 2 doubles and scored 3 times. The next game, Stillwater beat Milwaukee 8-4. Defeated by Stillwater was the sadly murmured by baseball enthusiasts last evening, reported the Milwaukee Sentinel. But the exciting games were about to start. Stillwater would go to Minneapolis. And 2 of the games, the last 2 of the series, were on July 1st and July 2nd. Both of the games were won in extra innings by Stillwater. The first game went into 12 innings. Quinn was the pitcher and gave up only 1 run. Stillwater scored in the 12th, and both runs were scored by Joe Visner, including a home run. I mentioned that because you talk about all these home runs, right, that players hit today. The Stillwater team hit 2 home runs over the fence the whole season, and both were by Joe Visner. The second game took 14 innings to decide, with Stillwater winning 8-7. It had McHugh pitching. Fowler went 3 for 6 with 2 doubles and 2 run scores. Excuse me a second. Now, the Sporting Life, remember that newspaper I told you about that covered sports throughout the nation? The Sporting Life noted 2 successive victories over Minneapolis, one a 12-inning and the other a 14-inning game, set the citizens of Stillwater wild. A procession with music and escorted to the hotel where a banquet was spread. In both these games, Johnny Peters, the new captain and shortstop, played a great game and accepted all 24 chances at second base. Now remember, I said they don't play with gloves, hard hit balls, and he accepted and got every grounder, every hit that was towards him, he got and made an out. That was just fantastic. That's why it was noted in the national paper. Also, I want to note about right after they got back, and they had this big party at the Sawyer House Hotel. They gave a special presentation, that they being the Stillwater team, the team members gave a presentation. It said on Saturday evening, members of the Stillwater Baseball Club did a very credible action. A young lad named Sam Belisle has been very active on the grounds and doing many small favors for the boys, saving them many steps. And under the leadership of Mr. Peters, Johnny Peters, they all chipped in and presented Sam with an entire outfit from top to toe, he becoming a regular dude. A better pleased or prouder young lad could not have been found in the city on Saturday evening. He deserves what was given to him, and he has been very attentive to his duties. But that renders the thoughtfulness and kindness of the team in giving him a good outfit. So the boy, basically he was shagging balls on practice days and that type of thing. And they gave him his own little uniform to match the rest of the team. On July 7th, remember Stillwater had off days. So they would play as many exhibition games as they could to get more money. Sometimes they would play Minneapolis or St. Paul, or other teams would come up and play exhibition games against them. And the Winona, Minnesota club came up on July 7th, and they played an exhibition game in Leaps Field in White Bear Lake. They played all their exhibition games in White Bear Lake, and they must have played about 6 or 7. And that exhibition game, Stillwater defeated Winona 18-2. I bring up Winona because they come back to play a little bit later. Now, boys will be boys. We got a rumpus at the Sawyer House with the Bay City boys. A few of the Bay City boys baseball club got full of booze Thursday evening and attempted to run the town. It didn't succeed in doing this, but an officer ran one of them in for a night's lodging, which cost him $7.50 when he faced Judge Netherway in the morning. When it comes to running a town, the boys had better let Stillwater alone. Now, the Bay City boys, they were kind of a tough nut. They were one of the best teams in the league. On the very top of this arrest Stillwater police thing, it was Jerry Turnbitty who was arrested and sent to the Hooskow. Jerry would play later that same year for the Kansas City Cowboys for the Union League. And so Jerry, who was arrested in Stillwater, played in the major leagues later that year. So there were fights, there were bar fights, there was all sorts of things going on with this team. But now we kind of see the beginning of the end. Stillwater tried to stay competitive, playing the games here in White Bear Lake when they're off days. They tried to continue to raise money. With Stillwater players like, they moved players like chess pieces. At one time, Stillwater had only 9 players on their roster. How many positions are there? There's 9. But there was one team that only had 8 players when they played them. So Stillwater actually had an extra one later on that they gave that other team so they could play. But as they were going through, they were playing at Terre Haute on July 22nd. Terre Haute only had 8 men. So Stillwater's Yarnell played center field and pitched for them. Stillwater won 14-4 that game. Fowler going 3 for 4, scoring twice. On July 25th, the Bay City Baseball Club, who got into the fight in Stillwater, they folded. They couldn't make ends meet. They were replaced by a club from Evansville, Indiana. But on July 26th, Bradley, who was a pitcher in the early days of the team, was re-signed. Then Bradley was going to pitch, and they wanted Fowler to catch Bradley. But there must have been something between Bradley and Fowler, because Fowler actually refused to catch the guy. He did not want to play, did not want to catch. Fowler, at that point, was suspended for 30 days and fined. And so what happened with Bradley? That game, Stillwater defeated Grand Rapids 11-6. The following game, Bradley pitched again and lost 10-0 to Grand Rapids, and then he was released again. Bradley was released after the game. Fowler played the following game. So his suspension of 30 games was only actually 2. And in the Stillwater Messenger, also on July 26th, this is what they said about the team. There is little reason to hope that Stillwater will have a professional team next year. Our citizens take but little interest in the entertainments which in other cities draw large audiences. Here are the receipts from an exhibition game run $25 to $100, while in St. Paul, Minneapolis, the receipts are from $150 to $600. As the cost of the home club for each game played on its own grounds is at least $100, in addition to salaries, it is evident that such amusement will not be furnished any longer than required to complete an existing contracts. So the team, it wasn't looking good. They were off to Milwaukee to play 2 games in Milwaukee on August 2nd and August 4th. The Stillwater team continued to play hard, but it wasn't enough. And they lost August 2nd to Milwaukee 5-1, and they lost 10-2 on August 4th. Fowler, in that last game on August 4th, played shortstop for the first time, and he pitched the last 2 innings. And those were the last 2 innings for the club. The club was disbanded, and also that same day, Fort Wayne, where Stillwater got their first win, that they also disbanded. So the entire club were paid off in Milwaukee. Some of the players came back to Stillwater. 5 members, actually. So there was D. Lee, Fowler, Yarnell, Visner, and John Quinn. It says here in the paper, the boys took their disbanding quietly, and they say that they did not wonder at it from the play that was being made. They knew they were going to be disbanded because they were playing like crap. So what happened to the players? Well, they scattered off. A lot of them ended up playing elsewhere. I should say what next. Stillwater finished the year. They played, of the 110 games, they played 66. They won 22 and they lost 44. They were near the bottom of the standings. Fowler played 51 games and batted .298 with 7 wins and 8 losses as pitcher. The Northwestern League suffered with the loss, not only the Stillwater Club, but Fort Wayne, Bay City, and others right after. The league tried to reorganize, adding Winona. Remember, Winona came up here to play Stillwater and lost 18-2 to Stillwater, who was one of the worst teams in the league. You know how that went. But 2 weeks later, the league of the 12 clubs was down to only 4, and later the league completely disbanded. They never finished the year. Several clubs, however, including Milwaukee and St. Paul, went into the Union League, one of the major leagues, for a few games before that league also collapsed. In 1884, the major leagues had 3 leagues: the American Association, the National League, and the Union League. It has happened before. The Union League struggled, obviously. And so 2 of the teams from the Northwestern League ended up replacing other teams in the Union League. That is when Minnesota got their first major league team, being St. Paul. Players scattered. Most have found other clubs to play out for finish out the year. The managers of the Keokuk Club, Keokuk, Iowa, contacted the directors of the Stillwater Club, and they wanted a couple of players for the following season, for 1885. One of the players was Otto Schomburg, and the other player was Bud Fowler. So Fowler ended up in Keokuk, Iowa for 1885. The Stillwater players that played and ended up in the major leagues: Edward Brown, Joseph Connor, Fred Corey, Peter Fries, Frank Graves, Pat Deely, Fred Gunkel, Frank Jones. You can see some of them played a couple years, some of them played a couple games. Joseph Miller from White Bear here. Johnny Peters, John Pickett, Otto Schomburg, and Joseph Visner. Stillwater had a pretty good team. If they could have lasted and played in the following year, I think they would have been at the top of the league. But whatever happened to John Fowler? John Fowler's career after Stillwater was a unique one. He was a baseball nomad. He left Stillwater to play in Keokuk. However, Keokuk folded after 8 games, so he played more games than Stillwater. And he also played with his teammate Otto Schomburg. In 1886, Fowler played in Topeka, Kansas. In 1887, he played in Binghamton, New York, batting .350. He also played for Santa Fe, New Mexico, Greenville, Galesburg, Illinois, Terre Haute, Indiana, Findlay, Ohio, Lincoln, Nebraska, Kearney, Nebraska, Adrian, Michigan, and Lansing, Michigan. He would be best remembered for organizing, managing, and promoting all-black baseball clubs, especially the Page Fence Giants. If Fowler could not find a team to play on, he organized a black team, and he would barnstorm across the country. And he started teams all over the place, including the Cuban Giants, Smoky City Giants, All-American Black Tourists, and the Kansas City Stars. He was a champion of black baseball, and he tried to start a Negro League in 1904 and 1905, but could not find the financial backing. Some credit Fowler with the creation of shin guards and the feet first slide, although both can be debated. In the sporting life, December 30th, 1885, here's what they noted about Fowler. Fowler, the crack-colored second baseman, is still at Denver, Colorado, disengaged. The poor fellow's skin is against him. With his splendid abilities, he would long ago have been in some good club had his color been white instead of black. Those who know say there is no better second baseman in the country. He is besides a good batter and a fine base runner. They actually admitted it in a national newspaper that he was black, so he wasn't going to play. But if he was white, he would have been the best second baseman in the country. Yeah, whatever. Historian L. Robert Davids wrote about Fowler. He was not docile when threatened, and had several confrontations with other players and management through the course of his career. And you saw that in Stillwater when he refused to catch that one pitcher. In a book, History of Colored Baseball, written by Saul White, and Saul White played with Fowler on the Page Fence Giants. In 1907, he describes Fowler as a celebrated promoter of colored baseball clubs and a sage of baseball. Bud's final years, though, after his attempts to start a Negro League failed, he faded away nearly into obscurity. He became ill and moved in with his sister in Frankfort, New York, and he died on February 26, 1913, at the age of 55. Well, he was buried in an unmarked grave, and in July of 1987, the Society of American Baseball Researchers, also known as SABR, placed a headstone at the unmarked grave of Bud Fowler in Oak View Cemetery in Frankfort, New York. You want to see that? That was me before I got this color of hair. Now, Fowler would not have been an important black player without playing in Stillwater. Stillwater gave him national exposure and allowed for people to see that he was more than just a sideshow. He, along with other black players, could really play the game. That is what he will be long remembered for. And how good was Fowler? I mean, he played, you're all looking at me like, okay, he played in the minor leagues. How good was he? Well, in the minor leagues, he did come across major league pitching. He actually came across Hall of Famers. When he played against Saginaw, Michigan, he batted against a pitcher named John Clarkson. John Clarkson would go on to the major leagues, and he'd have 328 wins, and he was elected to the Hall of Fame in 1963. Fowler played against him in 4 games in 1884. He had 16 at-bats and 5 hits. He batted .313 against a Hall of Famer. And he also played against Bob Carruthers in 1884, who pitched for Minneapolis. He had 218 wins and 99 losses. In 2 games against Carruthers, Fowler had 10 at-bats and 4 hits, and he batted .400. So yes, he could play. He could play against major league talent. But Fowler really was an obscure thing. I didn't know about him until 1982, and there's still people today that don't know about Fowler. But the Hall of Fame knew about Fowler. He grew up in Cooperstown, New York. And the early baseball history committee recommends people every 10 years to be elected to the Hall of Fame. People who have been lost in history, who are an obscure part of our history. And in 2022, you can see Fowler, right up there, was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame, along with Jim Cott and Tony Oliva, and Minnie Minoso, a couple others there. So Fowler is enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame in the community in which he grew up. He is the only person in the Baseball Hall of Fame to be a native from Cooperstown. So as I said, Bud Fowler and the Stillwaters, they weren't all that great of a team. 11 of the players either had or went on to have major league experience. Fowler is now part of that Stillwater team that is in the Hall of Fame. So that team of 1884, and even though they only played the 66 games, certainly had a big impact on the history of baseball. And that included some from White Bear Lake. And that is the story of Stillwater and Bud Fowler. Do you have any questions? I wish. Where the baseball stadium was is still a baseball field in Stillwater. It's no longer got the fencing around it. The earliest photo we have from that is from 1920, so about 60 years later. If you can find one, we'd love it. We also do not have a photo of the team. We do not have a photo of Fowler in his Stillwater uniform. There's only 3 known photos of Fowler, and I've showed them all throughout this thing. But again, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. It was great to talk about. Oh, Dan has it. He just never collected the photo of here. But I should also point out, Bud Fowler played baseball in Stillwater, and actually, 80 years later, no, not 80, 70 years later, sorry, there was another guy who played on the Stillwater Loggers baseball team who also had a nickname of Bud, who's also in the Hall of Fame, the Football Hall of Fame. Bud Grant played for Stillwater on that same field that Bud Fowler played on in 1954 and 1955. So it kind of brings it together. So I guess this Bud's for you. So thank you all very much.